Have you ever walked out of a discussion feeling as if you had lost, even though you had said everything you needed to say? You tried to explain, and the more you spoke, the more tangled it became. You tried to stay polite, and the other person pushed even further. You wanted to prove you were right, and strangely, with every sentence, you drifted farther away from your own strength. Perhaps you are living among people who speak louder to win, interrupt as a habit, mock as a way of communicating, and call their arrogance confidence. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, once spoke about the shadow, the part within us that is easily activated when we feel disrespected. And when the shadow is touched, we no longer speak to share, we speak to defend ourselves. Every time you react instinctively, you are handing someone else the power to control your emotions. If you argue while activated, you are still playing to their rhythm, and the price you pay is losing control of both your body and your mind. And if you do not recognize this mechanism, you will repeat a familiar cycle. You speak and feel regret. You stay silent and feel resentful. Then you go home asking yourself, where did I go wrong? The change that is happening is not in what they are saying, but in the fact that you are gradually getting used to having to explain yourself to be respected, and you have not yet seen it. In this video, I will share with you 7 silent weapons to help you keep your power without saying a single word, so that no one can drag you into their game anymore. And please pay special attention to the 7th weapon, because only when you no longer give anyone the power to touch your inner peace will those who live off your reactions quietly step away. Weapon 1. Silence is not submission. Have you ever stayed silent in a conversation and then gone home, reproaching yourself? I should have said one more sentence? And have there been times when you did speak back, yet walked away from the conversation still feeling uncomfortable? The discomfort does not lie in whether you stayed silent or spoke up. It lies in the fact that the conversation pulled you out of your own rhythm. Silence is not weakness. It only becomes weak when you stay silent out of fear, while inside you are still contracting, still blaming yourself, still haunted by that conversation. You say nothing, but your mind is dragged away, and your body becomes tense. At that moment, you sit quietly in your room, replaying the conversation, your mouth silent, but inside, everything is running non-stop. Why didn't I answer back? What do they think of me? Was I disrespected? You think you avoided conflict, but your body still pays the price with tension, a flushed face, insomnia, or a lingering irritation that lasts for hours. People often judge someone through conversations. Many times when you stay silent, they immediately think, being silent means you are stuck, lack logic, cannot argue. But that is not always the case. There are times you are silent because you know perfectly well that you could speak. You simply see one thing clearly. The other person does not want to understand. They want to win. If you continue, you will have to argue to the very end just to be considered right, and you do not want to step into that kind of game. You can debate. You simply do not want to turn respect into something you have to prove with words. 2 kinds of silence look very similar from the outside both times you say nothing. But one kind is giving space to the other person, while the other kind is holding space for yourself. Silence out of fear often begins with a familiar thought. Forget it. Let it go, so things stay peaceful. You swallow the sentence you wanted to say to avoid trouble, avoid being disliked, and avoid being judged. But the price is that you leave the conversation with the feeling that you have just abandoned something important in yourself. Not because you lost the argument, but because you pulled yourself back one step. And when you stay silent that way, it is close to submission, because you are silent, so the other person gains, while you lose your part. The second kind is silence from self-mastery. You can speak, you know you can speak, but you deliberately stop, because you realize the other person's goal is not mutual understanding. They want to win, to push you into having to explain, to defend, to prove yourself. You do not step in. You keep your way of speaking, your position, your boundaries. Sometimes you choose another way. Speak later, speak privately, write it down, or let the results of your work answer instead. And because you are the one deciding, you walk away without feeling that you lost anything. This silence does not make you lose ground. It makes it clearer about what you allow and what you do not allow. I once heard someone say, "Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt." And the older I get, the more I understand another thing as well. Not every battle is worth entering, especially when the price is your own peace. Silence chosen from strength is a form of self-command. It is not a weakness, it is mastery. Imagine a situation. In a meeting, you have just spoken half a sentence when someone cuts you off, speaks louder, and pulls the discussion in their direction. You fall silent. If you are silent out of fear, you usually look down, force a smile, thinking, "Let it go." Do not make it tense. You let them continue, and your part drifts away. When the meeting ends, you feel angry because your idea was not fully said, and others may have misunderstood or even taken it. Back at your desk, you are still upset and regretful, thinking, "If only I had added one more sentence, it would have been different." But in the opposite case, you do not lower your head. You do not smile awkwardly. You let them finish, while quietly writing down 2 or 3 key points of your own. When it is your turn, or there is a pause, you say one concise sentence, straight to the point. Or you choose not to jump into the fight for the floor anymore. After the meeting, you send a message or an email. "Here is a summary of my points, so we can finalize." In this way, you do not have to compete for airtime in the room. Your ideas are still acknowledged, the work still moves forward correctly, and you do not carry resentment home. We are often taught that not responding is a weakness, that we must react to protect our status. But many rushed reactions actually come from the fear of being disrespected. The more urgently you try to prove yourself, the more you place yourself in a position of needing others to validate you. Some people are only strong when they can make you react, but when you can hold yourself, you no longer need to prove anything, because you do not let a single conversation decide your worth. Jung said, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, thinks one is." The part of us that wants to preserve an image before others is the persona. When you stay silent out of fear of losing your image, the persona is driving. When you stay silent because you are grounded, that is you. Just seeing this point will make you blame yourself less. You will understand why sometimes you talk a lot and still feel exhausted, because the motive underneath is not sharing, but self-defense. Silence is not submission. It is precisely what shows that you still have the right to choose how you respond, instead of letting others pull you into their rhythm. And if you do not understand this point, you will easily remain silent in resentment or speak out in impulse, and then carry an unpleasant feeling for the rest of the day. From there, future conversations are no longer exchanges. They begin to smell of tension, of defense, of competition. And at that point, many arguments appear that are not really about finding right or wrong, but are simply games of power. Weapon 2. Arguments are often a power game. Many conversations are not actually meant for understanding each other. They unfold like a contest of status. Who keeps their composure? Who gets pushed down? Who has to explain? Who has to apologize? And when you enter thinking this is a place to clarify right and wrong, you will become very tired very quickly, even if you are right. Have you ever entered a conversation thinking it was just a normal discussion, where each side presents their view, figures out what is right and wrong, and then understands each other? But at some point, you stop focusing on solving the problem. Instead, you are only trying not to look foolish, not to be cornered into silence, not to be looked down on. You shift from explaining the issue to defending yourself. You may be right, logical, with evidence, but the other person does not care about right or wrong. They use different ways to win, speaking louder, interrupting, mocking, twisting words, changing the subject, pulling others in, and confusing you. Their goal is to seize status, to feel superior, to feel right, to feel entitled. They use logic as a tool to serve winning and losing. Today, they can argue one way, tomorrow, the opposite. As long as you are pushed into the weaker position, many people think arguments exist to find right and wrong, and whoever has better reasoning wins. But in real life, many arguments do not begin with the question, where is the truth? They begin with the intention, who gets to be above? You bring reasoning. They apply pressure. They speak louder, interrupt more, and push you into explaining endlessly. You talk about the issue. They strike at your emotions, make you angry, confuse you, and make you lose composure. And when someone enters only to win, they are not really listening to what you say. They are only waiting for the moment you slip, so they can corner you. The moment a conversation starts to change is usually easy to notice. At first, both sides talk about the issue. Then gradually, the other person shifts to holding a position. They speak louder to overpower, not to clarify. They interrupt constantly, so you cannot finish your thought. They nitpick every word, so you are forced to restart your explanation. And the more you explain, the more time you lose, the more confused you become. Sometimes they pull other people in, not to hear more perspectives, but to create the feeling that you are standing alone. They push you into the position of having to prove yourself, to explain yourself, even to apologize, while the original problem was their behavior. And if you entered the conversation with the mindset of a normal exchange, you will find yourself very quickly forced into the role of defender, as if you were the one at fault from the beginning. The worst part is what you do to yourself afterward. You leave the conversation and pass a familiar verdict on yourself. I am bad at communication. I speak poorly. I lack arguments. That feeling sounds reasonable, because during the argument, you really were confused. You lost your point, and you reacted clumsily. But that conclusion collapses everything into one label. It turns a tense situation into a flawed personality. In many cases, the problem is not ability. The problem is that the rhythm of the conversation has been taken over by the other person. They create an atmosphere where the other must constantly defend, constantly explain, and constantly watch every word. And when someone is pushed into that state, the brain prioritizes defense over reasoning. At that moment, speaking badly is not because of low intelligence, but because you are triggered. So after an argument like this, what you need to review is not, where am I bad, but what role was I pulled into? Because once you are pulled into the role of the guilty one, the one who must prove, the one who must ask permission to be right, then no matter how well you speak, you will still feel lacking. And that lack makes people believe the wrong things about themselves. You give professional feedback, and the other person does not respond to the point. They say, your thinking is naive, or you are new, you would not understand yet. In that moment, you realize they are not debating the issue. They are lowering your status. If you try to explain, you will be dragged into proving that you are qualified to speak, instead of discussing the content. I once heard someone say that with people like this, silence is the clearest way to see. At first, I did not believe it. Then one time, during an argument, I stopped explaining and let them continue. Just a few minutes later, the conversation revealed itself. They no longer held onto the original issue. They shifted to attacking and competing. Only then did I understand that many arguments are not meant to resolve anything. They are meant to press the other person down. Psychologically, when someone fears losing status, they are more likely to choose control over understanding. At that point, arguing becomes a way to keep the feeling that they are on top. They drag you into a kind of courtroom where you must present, justify, and prove that you are reasonable. And they keep the right to judge, to grade, to conclude. The more you try to make them understand, the deeper you step into the role of the one being tried. Jung believed, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When the ego is touched, people easily react unconsciously, and that reaction is usually meant to protect their sense of safety. You do not need this part to decide who is right or wrong. You only need to see that sometimes people argue because they are triggered, and they need to win to feel okay. So you do not need to rush, and you do not need to learn clever comebacks. You only need to recognize whether this person is seeking truth or seeking power. You watch whether they answer what you actually say. You watch whether they respect turns to speak. You watch whether they are genuinely curious or whether they are cornering you into being wrong. Just a few seconds of observing that is enough for you to understand what kind of conversation this is. The moment you see that they are seeking power, not truth, you have already won half the battle. Because from that moment, they can no longer pull you into the role of the one who must prove. They want you angry, confused, apologizing, explaining, and doubting yourself. But when you see it and stop, they lose their weapon. Weapon 3. Why silence throws people off balance. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Some people seem perfectly fine as long as everything goes their way, but the moment you stay silent for a few seconds, their tone changes. They talk more. They become more sarcastic, more restless. Only then does it become clear. What they need is not your answer. What they need is your reaction." Some people are completely normal when everything unfolds according to their expectations. They speak gently. They smile. They act cooperative. But when you fall silent for a few seconds, their voice changes. They speak more. They speak faster. They begin to mock. Only then does it become clear. What they need is not your answer. What they need is your reaction. So they know they are still in control. Silence does not end a conversation. Silence reveals the real goal of the conversation. When you stop, the other person has a chance to show whether they are speaking to understand or speaking to control. If they are speaking to understand, they will wait. If they are speaking to control, they will grow impatient. When you answer, the other person has something to latch onto. They can interrupt you, twist your words, change the subject, and pull you into explanations. They watch your reaction to see whether you are angry or afraid, soft or firm. When you fall silent, they lose the steering wheel. A gap appears, and they have to handle that gap themselves. When you are silent, the conversation creates a space. The other person no longer receives signals from you. They begin to guess in their mind. What are they thinking? This is a very common reflex because people feel uneasy when they cannot read the other person. They are used to relying on seeing you react, seeing you fumble, seeing you explain. When you are silent, they lose that switch, and they fear the gap more than most. And when they cannot pull you in, they return to their own feelings. Many people are not used to facing those feelings, so they increase talking, increase sarcasm, and increase hostility to fill the space and drag you back into reacting. Silence makes others lose balance because it forces them to shift from controlling the other person to facing their own feelings. While you were reacting, they focused on you. When you stop, they turn back to themselves. Those who are steady inside can handle it. Those who live by controlling others begin to feel unstable. I once heard a friend talk about a picnic trip with her music club. While the group was resting and sharing food, a person who did not like her made a sarcastic remark, something like, "Oh, you are talkative today," and stared at her, waiting for her to blush or explain. She did not force a smile, did not defend herself. She simply looked calmly for a moment, then turned to someone else and asked directly, "Where is the water, so I can get some for everyone?" The other person felt awkward, said a few irrelevant things, then went quiet, because they could not pull her in. Afterward, she said very clearly, "I was silent, not because I was afraid, but because I did not want to give them the feeling that they could control me." In that moment, you can see that they do not really need content. They need impact. They need to see you flustered. They need to see you soften your voice. They want you to explain. When you do not give them that, they reveal impatience or resentment. That is losing balance, because they no longer control the rhythm of the conversation. Some people are used to taking the floor. They interrupt others as a habit. They talk long, talk much, wander, so everyone has to follow. If you try to fight for the floor, the meeting becomes a microphone battle. If you stop, write down your key points, and sit quietly waiting, that person will often talk more than necessary. When that person talks too much, they expose their own contradictions. They change their position within their own speech. They repeat old points because they fear the gap. They look around to see if anyone reacts, because reactions help them feel they are still leading. When you do not join that rhythm, you can see more clearly whether they are speaking to exchange or speaking to hold power. Here, the key lies in a simple mechanism. People who are used to controlling rely on the feeling, I am leading. That feeling exists thanks to the other person's reaction. When you react, they know they have an impact. When you are silent, they lose that anchor. A person without an anchor will reveal their true part. Maybe anxiety, maybe wounded pride, maybe anger. Some people will try to pull you back by increasing pressure. They raise their voice, they question you repeatedly, they mock, and they speak as if you are at fault for being silent. This is a clear sign. They need you to participate so they can continue controlling. A truly confident person does not need others' reactions to feel okay. The goal here is not to stay silent for a long time out of spite. The goal is to be silent while keeping a normal presence. The other person reads your body before they hear your words. If you are silent while lowering your head, forcing a smile, or avoiding eye contact, they know you are afraid. If you are silent while keeping a normal gaze, a normal face, and steady breathing, they have difficulty pulling you. In these situations, a small change makes a difference. When you feel yourself about to rush into explaining, pause for one beat. Look to see whether the other person is waiting for content or waiting for you to get confused. Listen to whether they stick to the issue or repeat to apply pressure. Just that one beat is enough to keep you from being dragged by reflex. When you can do this, you stay with yourself longer. You are not swept into heating up and speaking just to end it. You can see what the other person is trying to take from you. And when you keep your reaction, the other person begins to waver because they no longer have anything to cling to. Silence then does not feel cold. Silence feels clear. You leave the situation, and your body feels lighter because you do not carry that conversation home. You do not need to replay it in your head to see which sentence you said wrong. You know you held yourself in the hardest moment. Have you ever seen this? Someone becoming restless just because you did not answer right away, as if your silence made them unable to sit still? If you have seen that, you may have just recognized something very real. That person needs your reaction to keep the feeling that they are in control. And once you see this mechanism, your silence is no longer a reflex. It becomes a way of responding with sequence, with observation, with pause, with stopping points, and with clear boundaries when needed. Leave a short comment. I have met this type of person. Or share one concrete situation you remember most. Sometimes simply naming the experience correctly is enough for you to begin taking back control of yourself. Weapon 4. The 4 pillars of wordless power. Not speaking does not mean staying mute. Not speaking here means a way of holding yourself in situations where you are easily pulled away. Many people become exhausted because they stay silent while their mind keeps racing, or they speak and then their body heats, and they regret it. The 0 words 4 pillar system is a sequence that helps you stand steady without raising your voice. This 4 pillar system follows a very natural flow. First, you stop your reflex, so you do not immediately bounce back to the other person's rhythm. Only when you stop can you see clearly what is really happening, who is leading, who is pushing, who is testing limits. Then you keep just enough space, so you do not rush to fill it with explanations or concessions. And if this is a type of situation that repeats, the final step is to end that loop with a concrete action, instead of only thinking about it and then falling into the same pattern again next time. The first 3 beats help you stand steady on the spot. The last beat determines whether this situation will come back again or not. Not reacting means not answering when your body is activated. Many people can still speak, still have reasons, but they speak while heated, and every sentence becomes a reaction. When the body is tense, the heart races, the face tightens, and words easily carry the color of self-defense. The result is that the other person has a handle. They only need to provoke a little more, and you flare up. In reality, when someone mocks you, you feel your chest heat up. You want to answer immediately, so you are not looked down on. When someone cuts you off, you want to take back your turn, so you are not overrun. At that moment, you pause for one breath. You keep your face steady. You look straight ahead, as if you were listening to something ordinary. The result of those few seconds is that you keep the right to choose your response, instead of being forced into reflex. Observation means watching patterns, not words. A power game often uses familiar behaviors. People interrupt to hold the floor. They change the subject to make you chase. They nitpick work, DS, so you must explain again from the beginning. They pull others in, so you feel alone. When you observe, you stop asking, who is right? And you start asking, what is this person doing with this situation? You can see whether they answer what you said or not. You can see whether they respect turns, or whether they are truly curious. When you see the pattern, you panic less. You stop concluding that you speak badly. You understand that you are standing in a type of interaction to win and lose. Imagine at work you comment on a process, and the other person replies with a status-lowering line. You are new. You would not understand yet. If you get stuck in that sentence, you will have to prove your qualification. If you observe, you clearly see they are shifting the conversation from content to position. The result is that you know you are being pulled onto a different track, and you keep your clarity. And at the very moment you see that they are changing the type of conversation to gain advantage, the next important thing is not to rush in to take it back. At that point, a short pause becomes what keeps you standing in the right place, not rushing to fill the space to be accepted. Many people fear tension. Many people think silence is awkward, so they add words, laugh it off, or they explain more. The result is that the other person has more material to twist, and you exhaust yourself. The pause here is very concrete. You listen, then you stop for 2 to 3 seconds. You keep a normal face. You do not smile to appease. You do not release an explanation to calm things down. When you do this, the other person has to deal with the silence themselves. Someone used to steering the game will start talking more. They reveal restlessness. They reveal their goal of pulling you to react. I once witnessed a meeting like this. There was a man who often took the microphone, waiting for the right moment to cut others off again. That day, instead of fighting for the floor, the other person stopped, wrote down key points, and let him finish. The longer he spoke, the more he exposed inconsistencies, even revealing what he was really aiming for. The result was that the other person gained more information without entering a fight for speaking time. What just happened in that meeting is the visible part, staying calm in a moment. But if every time you meet the same type of person, the same type of mic hogging, the same pulling of rhythm, then the issue is no longer whether that day you spoke or stayed silent. The issue is that afterward, everything remains the same. That person still has the same level of access to you. And when that access remains, the loop will naturally return. Many people are exhausted because of the same person, the same pulling style, repeating very regularly. You can be silent then, you can speak back then, but if you still give the same level of closeness, the same amount of information, the same opportunities, the loop will return. That is why reducing personal information is necessary. You reduce the time you spend in unnecessary meetings. You reduce the chances you place in that person's hands. You keep important work in clearer places. You move exchanges to proper channels. The result is that the person loses their entry point to pull you the old way. People who nitpick and twist your words often use what you say against you. When you realize that, you do not need to duel. You change the way you share. You speak briefly, only what is needed. You do not tell personal stories. You do not pass important plans through that person. You keep just enough distance to breathe. The result is that you are no longer dragged into those moments of speaking and then having to fix it. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When you do not see the pattern, you think everything is, because you are weak, unlucky, or just like that. When you see it, you begin to have a choice. The 4 pillars of 0 words are how you turn that choice into concrete action. Before we move on to Weapon 5, we want to thank you for staying through half of this journey. The fact that you are still here is not small. This content only truly has value when the listener is patient enough to look back at themselves. And if any part touched your experience, please know that feeling is real. You are not too sensitive. You are simply beginning to see clearly how you are being pulled in conversations. If you wish, leave a short comment or share one situation you have encountered when someone used debate to take power, or when you stayed silent and they changed tone immediately. Each time you write, it is like you name your experience correctly, and naming it correctly is the first step of change. Thank you for being here, and in the next part, Weapon 5 will help you distinguish very clearly which silence is self-mastery and which silence is slowly wearing you down. Weapon 5, which silence is self-control and which silence is submission. Have you ever met someone who, every time they drop a line like, "I'm just kidding," you suddenly feel touched in a sensitive spot? They speak as if casually, but that sentence hits exactly where you are vulnerable. And then they watch your reaction to see whether you will laugh it off or start explaining. In moments like that, self-controlled silence is very different. You pause with a clear attitude. You do not rush to say the right thing, and you do not force a polite smile to keep the atmosphere. You may change the subject, end the conversation, or simply leave. The important thing is that afterward, you are not stuck. You do not have to replay it again and again, thinking, "What should I have said back then?" You know you kept your boundary. Even without saying a single word, there is a kind of silence that ends things in the right place. The conversation finishes. You walk away. You are still normal. Your mind does not need to replay it, and you carry nothing with you. But there is also a kind of silence that looks the same from the outside. You are still silent, still enduring, still keeping things calm. The only difference is that when everything is over, you take it home. When you lie down, their sentence still runs in your head. When you wake up, the discomfort is still there. These two kinds look hard to distinguish on the outside, but inside, they are completely different. Self-controlled silence ends the conversation. Submissive silence carries the conversation home. When self-controlled silence happens, you may not speak right away, but you still keep a sense of agency. You know what you are doing, you know why you stopped, and you know how and when you will handle this situation. When submissive silence happens, you are silent because you feel that speaking would be dangerous, troublesome, invite retaliation, get you labeled as annoying, or simply because you fear the conversation will explode in a direction you cannot control. At that moment, silence becomes a way to avoid consequences. But when you are silent in submission, you will find yourself laughing it off. You change the subject to keep things peaceful. You nod just to finish it. You try to maintain an image of, "It's fine," to avoid tension. And the moment you turn your back, the discomfort begins to rise. It is not loud anger, but a low, smoldering irritation. You feel underestimated, and at the same time, you feel that you allowed it to happen. You start blaming yourself. You start replaying every sentence, and from there, one small remark can turn into a heavy evening. In very ordinary situations, they text you late at night and expect an immediate reply. They want you to do their part for them, and they are used to pulling others into their responsibilities. If you are silent with self-control, you may not reply right away, then reply later in a clear way, or adjust the rhythm of communication, or reduce your level of involvement. You do not need long explanations. You change the way you show up, and next time, they naturally understand where the limit is. But if you are silent in submission, you will be silent exactly when you need to say no. Then you do it anyway. You accept again. You carry again. You sigh to yourself, thinking, whatever, let's just get it over with. The result is that you lose time and you lose respect for yourself. The hard part is that from the outside, people still see you as kind, as patient, as accommodating. Only you know where you are, wearing yourself down. Psychologically, submissive silence usually comes with a sense of danger. Your body signals that, if I speak, something bad will happen. So, you choose the safest option in that moment, which is to stay quiet. It helps you get through the situation, but it leaves a debt inside. That debt is the feeling that you abandoned yourself. Self-controlled silence, on the other hand, comes with a sense of solidity. You may still be uncomfortable, but you are not confused. You are not pulled into pleasing. You still know where you stand, what you need, and what you allow. Jung once said, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Many people think they are very good at enduring, but in truth, they are avoiding the fear inside. When a person dares to look straight at that fear, their silence changes in quality. It is no longer avoidance. It becomes a conscious choice. In similar situations, the important thing is not forcing yourself to speak and not forcing yourself to endure. The important thing is recognizing what kind of silence you are choosing. If, after being silent, you still feel tense, irritated, and replay it in your head, that is a sign you paid a price. If, after being silent, you still keep clarity and still know your next step, that is a sign you still have agency. Just seeing this point already helps you blame yourself less, because you no longer mistake endurance for strength. When you recognize it, you will stop at the right moment, not rush to explain, not rush to fix, not rush to please. You simply stand still in your own attitude. From that moment on, silence is no longer a way of enduring. It becomes a way of being present that others can feel immediately, even before you say another word. Weapon 6. When silence becomes presence. Some people walk into a room and they have not said anything yet, but others naturally lower their voices. Others naturally slow down, not because that person is intimidating, and not because they hold any special power. That person simply stands right, sits right, looks right, and keeps their own calm. On the other hand, some people stay silent, but the more silent they are, the more they get pushed. Others interrupt them more easily, joke with them more easily, and treat their opinions as something that can be ignored more easily. The difference does not lie in whether one speaks or not. The difference lies in whether that person is truly present or not. Being truly present means the body is here, and the mind is also here. That person hears what is happening, sees the attitude that is unfolding, senses their own boundaries, and keeps their breathing steady. When a person is truly present, their silence does not send a signal of apology, and it does not send a signal of appeasement. Many people misunderstand silence as disappearance. They go silent and withdraw from the situation. They avoid eye contact. They pretend not to hear. They shrink inward. They wait for everything to pass. This kind of silence sometimes helps avoid a difficult moment, but it also easily makes others understand. This person will give way, and once others get used to you giving way, they will test how much more you can give. Silence becomes presence when you are still there, but you do not need to use words to defend yourself. You do not need to explain to be respected. You also do not need to smile it off to keep the atmosphere pleasant. You keep your place in a very ordinary way. You sit upright. You look normally. You listen normally. You slow your reactions. Others will sense that they are speaking to someone who has boundaries. Presence can be seen very clearly in small situations. In a meeting, there may be someone who often pressures others. They speak fast, they interrupt, and they cut in the moment someone opens their mouth. If a person is silent in a disappearing way, that person will lower their head, eyes on the table, hands fidgeting with a pen, mouth forcing a polite smile. The other person sees that signal and pushes further. They talk more. They decide for everyone. And they conclude for everyone. But if a person is silent in the present way, that person still sits upright, still looks up, still takes notes clearly, still keeps a neutral face. That person does not need to fight for the floor immediately. But that person also does not withdraw from the meeting. The other person still talks, but they begin to be more cautious. They begin to look to see whether the person agrees, acknowledges, or reacts. Just one posture and one rhythm of breathing are enough to change how others behave. In relationships, it is the same. When someone tries to push you into explaining, they often do it by talking fast, asking insistently, or steering the conversation toward what you did wrong. If you chase after them to explain, the conversation will follow their rhythm. If you go silent in a disappearing way, you will smile it off and keep it inside. But if you go silent in the present way, you stop, you look straight, you do not rush to answer. You leave a clear space of quiet. The other person will sense that you are listening, but you are not being pulled. Why does presence have such an effect? Most power games rely on one very concrete thing. They want the other person to lose composure. When you lose composure, you speak faster, speak more, explain at length, or react impulsively. When you do that, you hand the conversation over to them. They interrupt you more easily, pick at you more easily, and steer the conversation more easily. But when you keep your presence, you keep your own rhythm, and the other person finds it harder to use rhythm to control you. Many people think presence means appearing cold. In fact, presence does not need coldness, it needs clarity. A present person does not try to make others afraid. That person simply does not shrink themselves so others can feel comfortable. That person does not ask permission to exist in the conversation. That person keeps calm as something ordinary, as a minimum standard that others must respect while speaking. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, thinks one is. This line from Carl Jung reflects exactly that. When a person lives by a role, they easily become silent in an apologetic way because they fear damaging their image. When a person stands closer to their real self, they are silent without acting. That person does not need to please, and that person does not need to prove. There is a very small but very clear change that turns silence into presence. When a tense situation appears, you slow your breathing a little. You let your shoulders drop. You keep your face in a neutral state, and you keep your gaze natural. You do not stare, and you do not avoid. You do not force a smile. You do not rush to fill the silence. The other person will realize that you are here and that you are in control of yourself. When you can do that, you will feel a different kind of calm. It is not the calm of having avoided the situation. It is the calm of not abandoning yourself while the situation is happening. You are still there. You are still clear. You still keep your body with you. You do not need to win with words. And you begin to see that sometimes, just by being present, others already push less. If before there were times when you were silent and others still pushed, maybe the issue was not that you were silent, but the state you were in while silent. When a person is silent but still present, still keeps eye contact, still keeps breathing, still keeps their place, the conversation naturally changes its quality. Those who like to pull will find it difficult because they cannot find the familiar weak point to press. And then there will be a very clear moment. You do not need to say anything more. But the atmosphere has already changed. The other person slows down, their voice becomes less aggressive, their words less sharp, or they shift direction themselves, not because you defeated them, but because you are no longer an easy place to pull. Simply by standing still in the right way, many games run out of road on their own. Weapon 7. The greatest victory. If you have ever walked out of an argument with the feeling, I won the words, but my whole body is exhausted, then you will understand how precious this moment is. One day, you choose to stop at exactly the right place. You do not chase after it. You do not tense up to argue back. You do not turn yourself into the one who has to prove. And the person who usually pulls you into the loop suddenly grows quiet. They change their tone, they attack less, and they withdraw on their own. You sit there and realize that you have just taken back the most important thing of all, the right to keep your peace. Right in the middle of the dialogue, there is a very strange moment. The conversation is still there. The other person is still standing in front of you. But you are no longer running after the rhythm of winning and losing. You do not rush to interrupt. You do not rush to explain. You do not rush to prove. But their reaction changes right on their face. Their voice softens. Their words become less firm. They change the subject, or they end the conversation early. Some even turn and say something like, "Let it go." You see very clearly that the loop has just been cut right on the spot. This moment is very easy to misunderstand. When you hear, "they withdraw on their own," you may immediately think of a familiar tactic. Stay silent to make them angry. Stay silent so they deal with it themselves. Stay silent so they see my importance. If silence is used that way, it becomes just another weapon. And then the conversation returns to the same old place. Who is better? Who wins? Here, they withdraw does not happen because you make them uncomfortable. It happens because you no longer give them what they are waiting for. They are waiting for you to explain. They are waiting for you to heat up. They are waiting for you to lose control. Or they are waiting for you to apologize so they can hold the upper hand. When you keep a silence that is present, calm, and clear, they no longer have a button to press, and they will stop on their own. Some people live in interaction through other people's reactions. When you react, they feel they have influence. When you explain, they feel they have the right to judge. When you get upset, they know they have hit the point. They do not need you to be wrong. They need you to wobble. And before, you often wobbled because you still wanted everything to be resolved with words. When you stop, when you do not send your reaction outward, the chain is cut. The other person loses what they were holding on to. They no longer have a place to interrupt you for satisfaction, no longer have a place to twist your words, and no longer have a place to push you into defending yourself. They can still speak, but they speak without getting what they want back, and that feeling makes them withdraw. This withdrawal usually happens very normally. It is not a performance. It is a change in habit. The other person begins to see that sarcasm is no longer fun. They see that pressing no longer works. They see that provoking no longer makes you lose control. When a behavior no longer brings the familiar result, people will reduce it or move on to find someone easier. You do not need to defeat them. You only need to stop fitting the role of the one who gets pulled. Before, every time they threw out a line, you picked it up and reacted. You picked it up by arguing back, by explaining, by trying to be polite, by laughing it off. No matter how you picked it up, you were still playing. When you stop picking it up, they are left standing alone with what they just threw. A friend of mine once told a story. That time she brought her husband to meet her relatives. At the meal, an aunt who liked to nitpick immediately said, "Married now? You look completely different. Must be well taken care of." Then stared at her, waiting for her to blush, smile awkwardly, or explain. In the past, she used to rush to justify herself to save face. The more she spoke, the more she got twisted. And the story slid into things like, "Girls these days. What kind of family did you marry into? How much is your salary?" That time, she changed. She stayed silent for a few seconds, face normal, kept picking up food, then asked a very practical question. "Aunt, would you like more soup? I can pour you some," and turned to talk with her mother about what to cook tomorrow. The aunt was left hanging because she could not get a reaction, could not pull her into the role of having to prove. She added another line to fill the space, but because no one followed it, the line fell flat. The meal went on, and my friend said that for the first time, she went home without replaying every sentence in her head. A friend of mine once told the same story. That time she brought her husband to meet her relatives. During the meal, an aunt who liked to nitpick said sarcastically, "Married now, you look completely different," and stared at him, waiting for a reaction. Usually, she rushed to justify herself, so the more she spoke, the more she got twisted. This time, she stayed silent for a few seconds, face normal, kept eating, then changed to a practical line. "Aunt, would you like more soup? I can pour you some." The aunt was left hanging because she could not get a reaction. She added a few more lines, then lost the rhythm. She went home, and, for the first time, she did not have to replay that meal in her head. In personal relationships, P.S. it is the same. Some people like to provoke you until you explode. Then they switch roles and say you are too much, too sensitive, making a big deal. If you rush to explain, you fall into a loop of apologizing, getting angry, explaining, and then getting tired. When you keep a present silence, look straight, do not fight to win, stop at the right place, and reduce their access to you when they behave that way, the familiar loop stops running. The other person either reduces it or distances themselves, and you no longer need to chase. The greatest victory usually does not lie in the moment the other person becomes silent. It lies in the moment inside you when you stop demanding an old thing. Stop demanding to be understood immediately. Stop demanding to be recognized immediately. Stop demanding that others see you as right. When you demand less, you get pulled less. When you get pulled less, you begin to regain your right to choose. Choose to speak when needed. Choose to be silent when needed. Choose to leave when it is not worth it. Many people think they get pulled because the other person is strong. In reality, many times you get pulled because you still have a very easy button to press. The button, "I must prove I am not wrong." The button, "I must explain so they understand." The button, "I must keep my image." When those buttons are sensitive, others can press them easily. When you see them and you reduce putting those buttons outside, others can no longer hit them. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Sometimes what needs to be seen is not the other person, but the reflex inside you. The reflex to rush in to defend. The reflex to want to win. To reduce the feeling of being looked down on. When you see that reflex, and you hold yourself, you move closer to the solid part inside you, the part that does not need to fight to exist. You cannot force anyone to withdraw. You also do not need to set a goal of making them withdraw. You only need to do one very concrete thing. Reduce their access to your emotions. This week, choose one situation where you often get pulled and try changing one small detail. Reduce one rushed reply. Reduce one long explanation. Reduce one private sharing with someone who uses it to twist you. Change the way you show up, and let the new behavior speak for itself. When you do this long enough, one day you will realize that the person who used to make you lose your temper no longer can. That person may still be them, but you are different. You go home without your mind replaying every sentence. You sleep without your chest feeling heavy. You walk out of a conversatio, and your body still feels normal. That feeling is very clear. It feels like freedom. You do not need to say a single word to prove you are strong. You only need to live in a way that others can no longer pull you around. And if this journey touches you, maybe you will want to ask yourself one very honest question. Who am I giving the right to touch my peace? If you want to leave a small mark for yourself, you can write one short line. I choose to stand firm. To defeat anyone without saying a single word is not about fighting or doing anything dramatic with actions. It is a kind of psychological victory. You do not let the other person pull you into their game. You win when you do not react in the way they want. If you have made it this far, you will see that true strength sometimes does not come from speaking better, but from not needing to speak to prove yourself. Silence is no longer misunderstood as losing, but is placed back where it belongs. It is weak when it comes from fear and leaves tension inside. You also begin to see an uncomfortable truth, that many conversations are not aiming at right or wrong, but at who holds the position, who must defend themselves. From there, you understand why, when you stop reacting, some people begin to grow restless, because they lose their anchor for pulling you into their rhythm. You also now have in your hands a method with a clear sequence. Stop the reflex. See what is really happening. Hold the pause. And when necessary, tighten the boundary with action. Most importantly, you can distinguish which silence allows you to stay with yourself and which silence is slowly wearing you down. And when silence is no longer disappearance, it becomes presence, clear, calm, not asking permission to be respected. The final result comes very naturally. Others step back on their own because they can no longer take reactions from you, and you keep yourself intact. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Sometimes, what weakens us is not what others say, but how we unconsciously cooperate with it by stepping away from ourselves just to exchange for peace. When you stop doing that, everything around you begins to change, not because everyone becomes better, but because you are no longer easily led. If you have stayed until here, thank you. Because going through such a journey requires patience and a bit of courage, especially when what is being said touches experiences that many people usually hide in silence. We will continue with content that is clear, practical, and deep enough so that after listening, you can look back at yourself without feeling judged. If this content is useful to you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next videos. Thank you for listening, and see you again in the next video.